Imagine arriving at a racetrack in a Porsche that costs around $150,000, parking beside exotic machines wearing prices that can climb toward seven figures, then watching the supposedly cheaper German car disappear from them once the stopwatch starts. No velvet rope theatrics, no 12-cylinder engine under a glass cover, no doors opening toward the sky. Just a 911 with 3 characters on the back that serious drivers recognize immediately. GT3. Today, those characters can put buyers on waiting lists for years, push used examples above their original sticker prices, and force loyal Porsche customers to build an ownership history just for the privilege of being offered one. Yet the strange part is that Porsche never originally created the GT3 to become a status symbol. They did not sit around planning the ultimate enthusiast 911. They built it because motorsport regulations forced them to. In 1999, Porsche wanted to race the 911 in the GT category, but the rule book demanded something inconvenient. The race car needed a road-going relative that ordinary customers could theoretically purchase. That requirement is called homologation. In simple terms, if you want to race the weapon, you first have to prove that a version of the weapon belongs on the street. Porsche therefore built a road car largely to satisfy a regulation, gave it a name connected to the racing class, and created the 911 GT3. Inside the company, it was essentially a technical obligation, a box that needed checking. Financially, it barely mattered. Porsche simply needed a legal road car connected closely enough to its competition machine that the racing program could exist. Nobody could have known that this regulatory nuisance was about to create one of the most desirable performance car bloodlines on Earth. Even the naming story reveals how quickly the road car began developing a life of its own. The racing machine connected to the project had originally carried the RS name, but Andreas Preuninger, the man who would eventually become almost inseparable from Porsche's GT identity, loved those letters so much that RS migrated toward the street cars while the competition machine was renamed. The road-going requirement was already influencing the racing program that had created it, and then customers drove the thing. That changed everything. The first GT3 was not designed around plush leather, isolation, or effortless luxury. It was stripped down, sharp, loud, direct, and fundamentally closer to a competition 911 than to the comfortable sports cars people normally drove every day. Serious drivers suddenly realized they could buy one machine, drive it to a circuit on Saturday morning, run lap times capable of humiliating exotic cars costing 3 or 4 times more, then put a license plate back into normal traffic and drive home. Monday morning, the same car could take them to work. That sounds normal now because road-legal track cars have become an entire industry, but at the time, the combination was extraordinary. Race car response without needing a trailer, competition engineering with a warranty. Supercar killing performance without supercar money. The GT3 had been created so Porsche could race. Instead, it accidentally taught Porsche what its most obsessive customers actually wanted. They did not necessarily want the most comfortable 911 or even the 911 with the biggest horsepower number. They wanted the one that felt least filtered. The technicality became the icon, and a Porsche-obsessed engineer was about to make sure that philosophy survived. Andreas Preuninger did not enter this story as some detached executive assigned to manage a profitable product line. His relationship with Porsche began much earlier. As a child, his bedroom wall was dominated by images of a 1973 911 Carrera RS, specifically a white car with blue lettering. That was the machine living in his imagination. His father worked for a supplier connected with Porsche, and when the younger Preuninger eventually visited Porsche's development center at Weissach, the effect was immediate. He later described realizing that this was where he needed to work. He did not walk through the doors and instantly receive control of the company's most exciting cars. He worked his way inward, eventually becoming an instructor at Porsche's own high-performance driving school. That job placed him inside 2 early GT3 development prototypes before almost anyone outside the project had experienced them. One was yellow. The other wore a strange metallic orange that the team jokingly nicknamed Sausage Metallic because its color reminded them of a German sausage. Ridiculous nickname. Very serious cars. Preuninger drove these raw prototypes and became obsessed with what Porsche had accidentally created. When the company established a small group dedicated to these hardcore models, he became central to it. For roughly a quarter of a century, The GT department developed under a man who had spent childhood staring at a race-bred 911 on his wall. That matters because GT cars are not developed like ordinary trim packages. Think of the department as Porsche's internal skunkworks. Porsche itself already builds some of the world's most capable sports cars, but inside that company sits an even smaller operation beside the motorsport engineers, taking very good road cars and asking how much more race car they can survive becoming. The normal Porsche organization may produce tens of thousands of 911s. The GT group approaches those cars almost like an in-house racing tuner with factory authority. It can change engines, suspension geometry, aerodynamics, materials, transmissions, seats, weight, and thousands of tiny details that most owners will never consciously notice. The objective is not to create the easiest Porsche to live with. It is to create the Porsche that these engineers would personally want to drive. That sounds romantic until you examine what actually changes between a Carrera and a GT3, because the differences are far deeper than the wing. Put a standard modern 911 Carrera beside a GT3 and the basic silhouette can trick you into thinking one is simply a more aggressive version of the other. Mechanically, they are pursuing very different experiences. Start with the engine. Regular Carreras use turbochargers, and the 911 Turbo itself demonstrates how brutally effective forced induction can be. Turbos produce enormous torque and make power relatively easy to access. The GT3 deliberately goes another direction. Its 4-liter flat-six is naturally aspirated. No turbochargers. That decision leaves easy horsepower on the table, yet gives the GT3 something Porsche considers more important: response and revs. The engine climbs to approximately 9,000 revolutions per minute. 9,000. Many normal road engines have finished their work somewhere around 6,000 or 7,000. The GT3 is still charging toward a screaming upper range that sounds and feels closer to motorsport. Its output sits around 500 horsepower, which is hardly weak, but horsepower alone misses the reason people obsess over it. There are cars with more power, plenty of them. What they cannot easily reproduce is the way this engine reacts instantly to your right foot, keeps building as the tachometer rises, and turns every run toward redline into an event. The number is impressive. The delivery is the addiction. Then look underneath. Early in Preuninger's tenure, perhaps around 100 components could separate a GT model from a standard 911. Today the number is closer to 1,000 unique parts. 1,000 pieces changed because being slightly sharper is not enough. The suspension architecture is heavily influenced by Porsche's endurance racing experience. Aerodynamics are designed to generate real force rather than decorate a brochure. On a GT3 RS, the enormous rear wing is not there because somebody in styling thought it looked dramatic. At speed, the aerodynamic package can generate hundreds of pounds of downforce, pressing the tires into the pavement so the car can carry cornering speeds that would overwhelm a conventional road setup. And GT engineering is just as obsessed with subtraction. Sound insulation can disappear. Rear seats often vanish. Heavy comfort equipment is removed. Conventional interior door handles may become simple fabric pull straps. Carbon fiber, magnesium, titanium, and other lightweight materials appear wherever engineers can justify losing mass. Every pound removed helps braking, acceleration, steering response, tire load, and direction changes. A luxury engineer asks how to make you notice less. A GT engineer often asks how to make you feel more. More vibration, more mechanical sound, more steering information. More of what the tires and chassis are doing beneath you. Yet the clever part is that Porsche never pushes the car completely across the line into becoming unusable. A GT3 is loud and firm, but it is still a street car. You can commute in one. You can have air conditioning. It comes with a factory warranty. You do not need a pit crew to start it in the morning. That narrow zone between road car and racing machine is the entire trick. A Carrera is designed to be brilliant at almost everything. Fast enough to terrify you, comfortable enough to cross countries, civilized enough for errands. A GT3 intentionally throws part of that comfort away and spends the savings on connection. That philosophy becomes easier to understand when you look at the GT hierarchy. The GT3 is the foundation, the naturally aspirated, rear-wheel drive driver's car, still available with something increasingly rare in modern performance machines: a manual transmission. For enthusiasts who want the mechanical experience without advertising it through a giant fixed wing, Porsche offers the touring version, which preserves the essential GT3 character in a subtler body. Then comes the GT3 RS. RS means Rennsport, or racing sport, and the name tells you exactly what changes. If the regular GT3 is a race car civilized for the street, the RS is a track machine reluctantly carrying registration plates. Aerodynamics become far more aggressive, weight reduction gets more obsessive. Everything becomes sharper. Modern versions use movable aerodynamic elements related in concept to Formula One systems, allowing the car to reduce drag when appropriate while producing enormous downforce when cornering. This is where the original promise of embarrassing much more expensive machinery becomes almost absurd. Bring enough money, and you can purchase supercars overflowing with carbon fiber, enormous engines, breathtaking design, and seven-figure exclusivity. Then arrive at the circuit and discover that a Porsche whose basic shape still resembles a 911 can make them look extremely ordinary once braking zones and corner speeds matter. Above even that sits the GT2 RS, a different kind of animal. Take the focused GT chassis philosophy and abandon the naturally aspirated restraint by adding 2 turbochargers. The result produces around 700 horsepower, all sent to the rear wheels, making it one of the fastest and most intimidating 911 formulas Porsche has ever created. Enthusiasts gave the GT2 family an appropriately dark nickname, the Widowmaker. It is not subtle, it is not friendly in the same way a normal Grand Touring supercar can be friendly. It is the final boss of the 911 family, a machine whose performance demands respect even from experienced drivers. Porsche has also applied the same philosophy to its smaller mid-engine Cayman through the GT4, giving enthusiasts another path into this world. Different platform, same religion. But perhaps the clearest demonstration of what GT really means did not come from horsepower, wings, or Nürburgring lap times. It came from a gearbox. Porsche once moved the GT3 toward its extremely fast PDK dual-clutch transmission. Purely by the stopwatch, the logic was undeniable. PDK shifts faster than a person can. It keeps the engine in the ideal part of its rev range and makes the car quicker around a circuit. If the only objective were maximum performance, the argument would have ended there. GT customers revolted. To them, removing the manual transmission was not simply changing hardware. It removed participation. These people did not buy a GT3 because they wanted the computer to produce the fastest possible lap while they happened to sit inside. They wanted to be involved. Clutch pedal, gear lever, timing, mistakes, satisfaction. The slower transmission could create the better experience because the driver had more responsibility. Preuninger's team understood that distinction, and Porsche responded with the 911R. The name reached back to Porsche racing history from the 1960s, while the recipe looked almost defiantly simple. Naturally aspirated GT3 power, manual gearbox, no giant rear wing, reduced weight, minimal spectacle, maximum interaction. It was built for the person who would rather feel a perfect shift than brag about another tenth of a second on paper. The market reaction became ridiculous. The 911R quickly turned into one of the most valuable modern Porsches, with buyers paying huge premiums beyond its original price. And that moment exposed why million-dollar supercars can sometimes lose the emotional argument to something much cheaper. Performance has become easy to measure. Horsepower can be compared. 0 to 60 numbers can be sorted. Top speeds can be ranked. A computer-controlled transmission can always chase another fraction of a second. Connection is harder to quantify. You cannot put steering honesty, throttle response, engine sound, gear shift satisfaction, and confidence through a corner into one clean marketing number. Yet those are precisely the things GT engineers protect. Preuninger has effectively described his dream project with no restrictions as remarkably close to the cars his department already builds. That tells you everything. GT is not a side project where engineers tolerate enthusiast demands. Enthusiast demands are the project, which explains why the badge has become more valuable than its humble appearance suggests. Plenty of modern manufacturers offer performance packages that amount to wheels, trim, louder styling, perhaps a software tune, and a badge. GT means something materially different. The cars are connected to Porsche's motorsport organization and can contain roughly 1,000 parts, not shared with the standard model. The engine can scream toward 9,000 RPM. Suspension and aerodynamics are developed around racetrack requirements. Weight is removed, even when removing it makes the car less luxurious. Every sacrifice has a purpose. That authenticity creates demand Porsche cannot easily satisfy. Production remains limited. Waiting lists stretch for years. For particularly desirable versions, having the money may not even be enough. Buyers can need an established relationship with a Porsche dealer and a history of purchasing other cars before receiving an allocation. Consider the psychology of that. Someone can be willing to spend well into six figures on the Porsche they actually want and still be told they may first need to prove themselves by purchasing other Porsches. Customers do it. Then certain GT cars emerge from the showroom and immediately trade above sticker because supply remains tiny relative to demand. Some special versions have approached multiples of their original prices. The strange little homologation project Porsche once considered a regulatory necessity became a product customers compete for permission to buy. And that is why the $150,000 Porsche versus $1 million supercar comparison is more than clickbait when a racetrack enters the conversation. Porsche is not trying to beat exotic manufacturers at exotic theater. A GT3 does not need to look like a spaceship. It is using decades of racing knowledge to solve a different problem. How much competition car ability can you hide inside something with license plates, headlights, air conditioning, and enough civility to reach the circuit under its own power? That question began in 1999 because Porsche needed to satisfy a rulebook. 25 years later, the answer has become one of the company's defining products. The great irony is that the GT3 earned legendary status by refusing to behave like a normal luxury car. Spend more money elsewhere and you might receive softer leather, more isolation, a more outrageous silhouette, another 500 horsepower, or doors dramatic enough to turn a gas station into a photo shoot. The GT3 may give you fabric door pulls and ask you to tolerate more noise. Then the road tightens, the engine crosses 7,000 RPM, the steering starts talking through your hands, and suddenly the expensive sacrifices make sense. This car is not attempting to remove you from the machinery. It is trying to erase the distance between you and the machinery. So when you see a GT3 beside an exotic car worth 3 or 4 times as much, do not assume you are looking at the underdog. On the street, the $1 million machine may win the attention contest before the light even turns green. At the track, where braking, balance, aero, response, durability, and driver confidence replace theater, the calculation changes. That Porsche was bred by people working beside actual race car engineers. Its ancestors existed because Porsche needed to compete. Its modern descendants have been refined by a department run for decades by an engineer who grew up staring at a Carrera RS poster and somehow turned that childhood obsession into a job description. The full circle is almost too perfect. Porsche once built the GT3 because regulations forced a race car to have a street-legal relative. Now customers fight to get the street car because it feels like Porsche forgot to remove enough race car. What began as paperwork became philosophy. What began as an afterthought became a hierarchy. What began as a car Porsche needed to sell became the Porsche enthusiast desperately want to buy. The next time a 911 appears beside you and you notice GT3 on the rear, listen before you look. If that flat 6 climbs toward 9,000 RPM, you are hearing 25 years of engineers choosing emotion over convenience and connection over easy numbers. You are looking at a machine that can commute Monday morning, attack a circuit Saturday afternoon, and embarrass cars whose owners spent several times more for the privilege of arriving in something exotic. That may be the ultimate joke behind the GT badge. Porsche created it because racing demanded a road car, then spent decades turning the road car back into a racing machine one component at a time. So if you had the choice, which version gets your garage? The pure manual GT3, the aero-obsessed GT3 RS, or the terrifying turbocharged GT2 RS? Drop your choice in the comments, and if you enjoy the hidden stories and engineering decisions that turn ordinary model names into automotive legends, subscribe, because some of the greatest cars ever made started with ideas nobody expected to matter.